Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest episode of Book Chat. What? Book Chat? I got some gaming friends over here. We're going to chat about some books or one book in particular. Wait a minute. Hold on. There it is. Look at that. I got it right on my shelf. It is the book we're chatting about, or the game we're chatting about, and then the book that inspired it is called Red Rising. So it is a young adult sci-fi fantasy book released around 2014 by Pierce Brown. It is a series, an ongoing series. And the gentleman at the bottom of the screen made a game out of it. A matter of fact, has been at this a while in terms of trying to realize the setting of Red Rising. We're going to talk about the game, but we're going to focus mostly on how the game realizes what's in the books and then talk about the books themselves because we want to get people excited about reading. But hold on a second. That's a long intro. I got to introduce my guest first. It is the CEO and founder of Stonemaier Games, publisher of many games, including Red Rising. He is Jamey Stegmaier. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me back. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about Red Rising, books, games. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, make it happen. And to my right, she is the person who does Beyond Solitaire YouTube channel, as well as Beyond Solitaire books. We shocked Jamey Stegmaier. Had no idea that a book channel, BookTube, was attached to the website. So I'm very proud to spread the word about that. This is my bestie in gaming, Liz Davidson. Welcome to the show.
I always like to be on your show, so I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic. All right. So the agenda today is very simple. And it's actually Red Rising week here on Shelf Stories / the One Stop Co-op Shop, because we're also on the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. So we are going to do a review. I'm going to have Mark Dainty on. We're going to talk about the game itself and really break down. We took about an hour to talk about, the game and everything. This is supplemental, kind of filling in some gaps, and was happy to reach out to Jamey so he can fill in some gaps for us. So we're going to just jump right into it in terms of Red Rising, the game. And Liz, I think the way you articulated the question before we are on the call was like really, it cut right to it. So I'll let you go ahead and ask Jamey a question.
Okay, so for people who don't know about the Red Rising series, this is, Jamey, it's your favorite series, so let me know if you have a correction. But basically the world has been stratified by color, and there's a lot of genetic engineering that actually, changes people physically. So there's a range. So the lowest strata would be red, and these are people who actually have like red hair, and they do mining in the bowels of Mars and throughout the solar system. And then the top of the line, you have gold, and these golden people with incredible physical abilities rule over everybody else with an iron gold,
a golden fist.
But basically this is a game, this is a book series that's about rebellion and about changing society and about fighting against like the man and adjusting the way the hierarchy works. But the Red Rising game is very much about hand management and point accumulation. So I guess my question is, how did we go from this book series to this game?
Yeah. I love the question. And I guess a little backstory about how this game came to be is that I love this book series, like you said. And one of the reasons that I really love the series is that the characters in the series, in this dystopian world, this dystopian future, they're in this weird societal structure, and they're often faced with these really tough decisions about who they want to ally with, as some of them are trying to break the chains of this caste system and kind of expand their network, expand their group, expand their families, their friends beyond just the Reds. Like there are Reds that want to, they're trying to decide if they can trust purples or golds or people that are higher up on the societal structure. So I love the decisions that characters have to make about that, and just tough decisions characters have to make about their friends, the people that they hold close to them, the people that they choose to betray. And so during the design process for the game, the first few iterations of the game that I tried to design used a lot of meeples and bag building and worker placement, where all the meeples were different colors, the 14 different colors in the game. And you're kind of like looking down on this board, typical worker placement, moving workers around, or bag building. I tried both of those. And it felt, the player position that I put myself in and put playtesters in felt so separate from what these characters were doing, because the books are so character driven. And so I eventually gave up on the game. I was like, I can't figure this out. I can't figure out this experience that I feel when I read the books. I'm not capturing this in this game that showcases a lot more about the world, but it didn't showcase how I feel when I read the books, how I think the characters feel in the books. And so finally, that brings us around to what you eventually said. The game itself is essentially a Euro game where you're accumulating points in the game, but the key decision points on the game are which characters do you want to keep in your group, in your hand, and which characters do you want to banish or betray or get rid of? Who do you include in your inner circle, and who do you get rid of? And it's those interesting choices in the game that I finally felt represented the choices that the characters actually had in the books.
Mm-hmm. So then, because I imagine like the usual go-to for a game like this, right, or for an adventure game is an adventure game. You're basically a character drafted as a character into the world, and then kind of going places and doing things. Like when you said meeples and stuff, my brain immediately went to like, okay, minis and then movement. Mm-hmm. Then that so you never went in that direction. You always wanted to go in a Euro-y direction. Is that fair to say?
Well, and part of the reason for that is that a big reason that I wanted to make this game was to invite people into the books, invite gamers into the books who hadn't heard of it. And so I did not want to make a plot-driven game that would just spoil the books for someone. And so I needed to separate the story and the plot a little bit or I felt that I needed to. I probably could have done that, but I felt that I wanted to separate those two so that you could play the game and not spoil the books and get into the books through the game. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then, so I don't want to go too far down this direction, but I feel like it is a thing because I know like Jamey is very open with his reviewers, and talking about who gets the games and how he talks about them. And Jamey's very clear, doesn't watch a lot of reviews, right? But so
reviews of our games, I watch a lot of reviews, but not of the Stonemaier.
Of Stonemaier games. So then, looking around the verse, and this is something that Mark will have talked about in the previous episode, that Red Rising, at least as presently constructed, the hand management inspired by Fantasy Realms game, doesn't feel that thematic in the sense that, like, the characters, especially if you don't know the books, like if you don't know the books, then it's like, okay, why does serve several go to this? And it's just gold and it's just blue, it's just this. And like, it could have been a Harry Potter game with like the houses, and it could have been different games. How do you respond to criticism like that, where it's like, okay, this deck of 112 cards can kind of feel like it's disappearing and I'm just like color matching? Is that something that you've heard? How do you respond to that?
Well, I guess I have a question to throw back at you there, because I mean, the game really was designed from the ground up based on Red Rising.
Sure.
It wasn't a game where we just designed a generic game and you could have slapped any theme on it. So I don't know. Do you really think that the Red Rising, the way it turned out, do you think it could be applied to any work of fiction?
You want me to throw it to you, Liz, first, or do you want me to take that?
I'm thinking about it because like the game, I mean, I saw a lot of Red Rising in the game. I haven't played it enough to review it, but I've played it enough to talk about it, if that makes sense. I'm at like 5 or 6 plays. The Helium collection, getting influence at the Institute, the fleet actually was really interesting, because a lot of those elements I actually thought could have been their own games. Like thinking about like the fleet fighting was a big part of the series. The Institute, I almost expected there to be sort of like a Hunger Games style area control thing coming out of the boxes. I didn't actually know what to expect when I got the Red Rising game in the mail. I just wanted to be surprised. But I think that you could do something that's kind of like it, but not something that's quite it, because that many colors, if you know the characters, the way that they synergize does make a lot more sense. I think it's one of those games that you like more if you've actually read the entire book series and you know who everybody is and why. So like if you have a Jackal card, it doesn't necessarily go great with like a Darrow card or anybody that would have been Darrow's friends in the book. So like, I think you could adapt it to another fictional world, like maybe something where you're trying to create a bunch of allies against Voldemort, maybe. But you would have to make a lot of adjustments, because a lot of choices in the game really do come from understanding the Red Rising world.
Mm-hmm. Or from understanding how points work. So it's like, if these two go together, then put them together. If they don't go together, then don't put them together.
That's true, but I knew who to look for because I'd read the books.
Okay, so so it helped you kind of like
Yes.
really sink into in terms of that immersion or whatever it is that you're looking for in a thematic game.
Yeah, like, if Ragnar comes up, I'm like, oh, I know who works good with Ragnar. Let me find, or like, if it's somebody from a different faction, like in terms of teams, not colors. It's like, okay, like I know these people were friends, so maybe this other person's in here. Actually, I thought one thing that was interesting is that because there are so few named characters from certain color classes, I think that was where thematically
like
there was
some
struggle.
And stuff, yeah.
Because there aren't very many named brown characters. Like there's some pinks, there's some purples, there's some reds, but like some of the colors, even within Pierce Brown's own universe, get like kind of pushed to the back. Yeah. It's very much like a red gold thing with like a smattering of other people.
Yeah.
I actually thought that must have been really challenging.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because it's so character driven, and yet this game has like it's reds and golds, and there's a couple of smatterings of other folks. Then you have this full deck of like a bunch of pilots that we don't know and a bunch of greens. I think they're the newspaper or the periodicals that we don't know. So how did you approach that? Because that definitely seems to move away from that character driven paradigm.
Yeah. We had to kind of balance the two because you're right. There are some characters that are named in the books and others. You mentioned the greens. I think there's maybe one named green in the book, maybe two. And so for like the greens and colors like that, we approached it from what is something special that we want to do within this color of card and different variances on this one thing. Like purples were a lot of fun to design because they want weird combinations, or we gave them the ability to have weird combinations of cards, like cards with all the same letter in the word, or they want all odd valued cards, things like that. Because we saw them as more creative and artists. But yeah, we had to balance that with the name characters, and that's where a lot of the theme first design for the game came in. You used the example of the jackal is, and I like that example where the jackal. Like we didn't design a card and then we were like, okay, let's slap the jackal on this card. We were like, okay, who does the jackal want to hang out with? What types of things does the jackal want to do? And we applied the mechanisms based on that theme for the jackal. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it does help if you know what the jackal's all about. But I'm hoping with some of the cards that they inspire curiosity, that you play it and you're like, oh, that's a weird thing for this character to do. What happens in the book to make this character do that? Mm-hmm. Evie, the pink card Evie is one of those. Yeah.
Actually, I was thinking about talking about her too, because like Mickey versus Darrow, like who you're gonna match her with, that can go really wrong for reasons that are very clear from the novels.
Right.
So okay, so this is what I'll give you a quick summary of my thoughts. So I think that I can see where people are coming from, where it doesn't feel thematic, but I think that people define thematic different, right? So then I am not a character in this game. Like I am not Darrow. I am not Paxal Telemachus. I'm like, what am I in this thing? I'm like, I'm basically the reader. Like I figure like, a parallel would be like a game like Marvel Legendary, where I'm not Wolverine. I'm not, Spider-Man. I'm just like watching everything coalesce. And there's like that kind of separation there. And I can see where people kind of exist in that separation and say, okay, I'm not immersed in this game, therefore it's not a thematic game, right? Because I'm not, where am I? Where am I located? And then, so that's one way to define thematic, and that's totally fine, right? But then I think you can widen that out and this is where I came down to, like, so at the very first book, and I've only read the first book, we'll talk about like why in a second, but like in terms of near the beginning of the first book, when Darrow, the main character, the point of view character for the entire first book, realizes where he is, because he doesn't for a little while, and then he realizes where he is, and whoever he's with, and I'm keeping it spoiler free, kind of shows him the world, right? Whoa, there's the gold, there's the blue. I've heard about these people, but oh my goodness, there it is. And for me, that like one snapshot is what this game offers me. Right. So like if I'm not in the world, and I don't know if the game was successful of putting me like immersing me in the world, at least the game did a good job of evoking the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like the term of the use of the term evoking, and both in terms of the world, and I'll come back to the goal of design was to make you feel those tough decisions, which in any game, we have tough decisions. That's kind of a generic thing to say. But in Red Rising, the characters make these excruciating decisions at times. That, like, those are the most memorable moments of the books with me, when a character makes a decision that is painful for them, painful for others. And I wanted players to kind of feel that. Like, Jason, I know you love the game Pandemic, and I think Pandemic makes you feel like nervous. You feel that tension. And it's like a feeling that the game is trying to get you to capture. I think Matt designed that on purpose. He wants you to feel that. You may not feel like the pain of Spain when there was an outbreak in Spain. You don't connect with the Spanish when that happens, but you yourself feel something when an outbreak has happened. You feel nervous about it. And so I was trying to capture that same thing in terms of, you have this nice hand of cards. So it's tough to give up one of them that works for you. It's tough to yeah.
There's that idea of like in pandemic, and I'm glad you made that parallel, the short term, long term, right? So like, okay, I have cubes in front of me. They're about to explode in disease. I got to take care of it, but I have a hand. And if I don't meet with my friend over here to trade the card, then I'm going to miss the opportunity. I'm not going to be able to cure the thing, which is the long term play. So then what Red Rising does is you play the card, or you can play the card for the immediate benefit. You get helium, you get, increase in the flight track, but then you're giving up something. And you may not get that back. Either the Automa is going to take it. So we're solo players, so like we love our Automas. The Automa might take it, or someone else might take it, or so, like you, because chances are, like the thing that you played, it also has a end game bonus that would have benefited you. So is that a parallel to character decisions and they made it a novel? I think that's a your mileage may vary thing, but that's definitely kind of getting your story out there of what you were trying to accomplish with the game.
Yeah.
Good. All right, so that is Red Rising. We have a whole review of that stuff. That is the Red Rising board game. We have a whole review that came out yesterday. Go ahead and check the We Won't Stop Co-op Shop feed and also Shelf Stories. But we are here to geek out about books. One of the big reasons why Jamey made this game was to point people to this amazing thing that makes people happy. What do we do as human beings? We share happy things. And so what we're going to do is we're going to just give very overview, a pitch to people who are reading the books in a non-spoiler way. And then I'm going to do a hard thing. We're going to, wave our arms and do the spoiler thing. And then we're going to get into spoilers of at least the first book. And then because Liz and Jamey have obviously read further, they'll share stories about that as well. So in a non-spoiler way, I will invite I'll invite Jamey first and then Liz to share just in a general way why they should go out and seek these books.
And you want me to go first? Sure,
go ahead. You're the one that made me read the book again.
Right. So I guess the best I can say is why I love the books. And if any of this resonates with someone, then you can check them out. I love I love dystopian fiction in general. I don't want to say that I like the weird societal structures that emerge from dystopian fiction. Obviously, we know those are bad, but I like seeing how little changes to our state of the world, our society, could spin out of control into something that is very different, that we can escape to, but we're glad that it doesn't exist. And that's in Red Rising. I like that it's set in the future. I like the things that happen in the future. But it all comes down to to these character decisions that the characters make in the book. And there are tough leadership decisions that Darrow in particular and other characters make, where in other books, I feel like sometimes things happen to characters. They stumble into, you mentioned Harry Potter earlier. Harry Potter stumbles into a lot of stuff. He becomes a leader eventually, but it's because he gets lucky. His friends help him out a lot. In Red Rising, Darrow makes just these excruciating leadership decisions.
He becomes leader pretty fast.
Him as what's that?
He becomes leader pretty fast.
He does. He does. Yeah.
He struggles. Okay, so he struggles with leadership.
Yes, he struggles with leadership. Yeah. But I can see, I guess, why people start to follow him and why other people don't follow him because of those choices. And that's the reason that really hooked me into the books. There's certain moments, especially in the first book, where I'm like, oh, as much as I'm interested in this world, the plot, things like that, it's these decisions that make me want to keep reading.
All right. So that is a brief snippet of Red Rising. Go ahead, Liz. I know that because I remember I read your Goodreads thing, like you had linked it out on Twitter, and you were kind of like mixed about Red Rising generally. So maybe you can share a little bit about your experiences overall, non-spoiler.
Yeah, so the first time I tried to read the trilogy, I made it because I did it on e-reader, I could see, I made it 65% of the way through book 2, and then I just quit. And so going back and seeing that, I was like, let me try again. So I actually made it through the entire trilogy this time. I'm not ready to go on to the 4th book at this time, partially just because I always have like a to-be-read pile that's huge. Yeah. But I might go back at some point in the future after I give myself a breather. But there's a lot that I do appreciate about the books. I think a lot of what Jamey's talking about leadership decisions, and Darrow, he falls hard, he rises high. And he repeats that pattern. And that's about as much of a spoiler as I want to give before.
And
but
once again, it is a hierarchical society. That is the thing you need to know. Like, we see colors, but the colors are not like rainbow equal colors. Like, it is stratified hierarchy reinforced by genetic engineering and propaganda and stuff like that. So it's like that's the setting. And so Red Rising is all about it. There in the title.
Yeah. So I think my issue actually is that I like most characters in the book better than I like Darrow. And I think that part of it is I think that I'm a high school teacher. And so like 16-year-old boys are already kind of like a thing in my life all the time. But Darrow is really interesting because, you're inside of his head. And sometimes he's having these moments of maturity where he's like really thinking about his life and his decisions. And I'm like, okay. And then it's like, I'm a hell diver of Lycos. I'm this, I'm that. And I'm like, dude, like, stop. You were doing so well. And I feel like his love interest in the book feels similarly. But so I also YA is one of those genres where I like to read it. It's not usually my favorite, but I did think this was a totally decent YA series. Like, I would recommend this to boys that I teach. I would recommend this to people who like YA sci-fi. I think that it has its ups and downs as a series, but I also read the whole thing entirely the way through the whole time and remember enough character names to know who people were when I played the game. And I think that that is a testament to the fact that I really was pretty attached to those books while I was reading them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, what leapt out of me and it's striking because, I'll move between like a hardcore sci-fi or hardcore fantasy and then the occasional YA title that Liz like dribbles my way or somebody else. Thank you very much, Liz, by the way, for that. And what's striking to me about a series like Red Rising is that the morality for the most part is pretty clear. Right. Mm-hmm. It hits you in the face. Like, this is not a good society. Like, I think it's the very first chapter where it's like, democracy sucks. And, we have to have hierarchy. You cannot let the sheep, all this kind of thing. So it's like telling you, the reader, and it's a 2014 book. And, here in modern context, we are a democratically inclined society. So it's like, it's just hitting you over the head. It's like, this sucks. And there's going to be complexity, like that complexifies later because you can't have a good book without, like, you can't have all cardboard villains. Like, eventually it opens up of like, justifying why the leaders feel like they have to do what they do.
Yeah.
It still sucks. You still have a rooting interest. So like, I'm a big in world building. It's like, that's my first go-to whenever I look at a book, is the world building. And so the world building is very stark. It's very clear and it's interesting in a way. I love that moment of like revealing the hierarchy. I think I have to go with Liz there, where it's like the main character is like, okay. And but that's something to explore. But at the end of the day, we'll get into that in the spoiler section.
Yeah.
Non-spoiler, I can recommend it as a romp. As a fun, make you think a little bit, but for the most part, I mean, you're gonna get a lot of Hunger Games vibes, especially from the very first book. I'm not Hunger Games written before this one, right?
Yes, but I will also say that the follow-ups are very much departed from that. So don't define the whole series by the second half of book one.
Right. Yeah, it's just a wall of it. It's like, whoa, okay. This is and then he gets into, because it's an institute story. So it's like he goes into different levels of the institute and then he eventually graduates and kind of moves into the society. Again, moving through hierarchy and the different things that happen in the moments of the hierarchy is kind of what you're looking for when it comes to Red Rising. So those are non-spoiler thoughts. We all recommend the series. Jamey clearly recommends the series because he has a whole IP built around it. But now we're going to get into spoilers. Woo!
Back away, go, be gone.
Spoiler hands.
Last time we were like flopping around, like, don't proceed. Stop here.
So now we're in spoiler territory. I'll ask you, Jamey. I'll ask you, Jamey, first. So, like on a spoiler level, what were some of the things that you were thinking of, like, in terms of reading the book? What were some of the specific things that you can get into that said, "Oh, I have to make a game out of this. This is going to be awesome."
I don't know if there was actually a specific like there were definitely specific moments that stand out in the books that are the most memorable to me. But I think really it was just reading about the societal structure and being introduced to all these characters, these interesting characters that maybe that inspired me a little bit. The societal structure was probably a big part of it, because immediately I was like, oh, these are, I could see these as meeples in a game. I could do something with these and try to do something interesting with it. I think that's where it started. Yeah.
So what? Oh, you mentioned character moments. Like, what are some that really stick out for you?
Well, the one that I always go back to, because I think this was just such an interesting moment, is in the first book. I believe it's a moment between Tactus and Darrow, where Darrow punishes, I believe it's Tactus, for doing something really terrible, and he whips him in the back a number of times. He lashes him in the back, and then he turns his own back to Tactus and says, it's not just you alone that were responsible for this. I let this happen. You need to, I don't know if they use the term whip in the books, but essentially you need to whip me as well. And then when Tactus doesn't even have the strength to do it, he hands the whip to, I believe, Pax.
Yeah, it's Pax.
And asks Pax to do it. And I was like, I don't know if that was the right decision, but it was just such an interesting decision and a potentially leadership defining decision to make in front of all these people. That was like the moment I think back on when I think about the books.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was so compelling about the series as a whole, I think one of the aspects I really liked was that there was this idea that everybody should be given a chance at redemption and a chance to be better and do better instead of just crush. And I thought that really was meaningful, actually, in terms of Tactus's continuing story, which ends in a kind of upsetting way. But,
we're full spoilers here, so if you can go ahead and mention stuff.
Oh, yeah. So, Tactus does some bad stuff and betrays Darrow, but Darrow tries to forgive him, and then somebody else takes that out of Darrow's hands and kills Tactus. So Tactus really maybe could have turned it around, but we'll never know because he didn't get a chance to. And then later, that person regrets their choice. And I think that's actually one of the parts of the book that I thought was really interesting, especially because it's so often held in tension with, Darrow can't talk to anybody about his inner feelings because of what those feelings are. And, about being a red who's masquerading as a gold, living among golds. Like, he doesn't know who he can trust.
Also just a level of that was like when he had to murder one of the, like, another undercover
Titus,
red.
was it Titus?
Titus. Yeah. So his desire to keep that secret led him not just to kind of keep himself, but like to literally murder people who could eventually connect those dots.
Yeah. It's really, I thought that I liked the tension between, giving people another chance and being unable to open up and give people a chance. And you understand why, but also you can see, it creates problems in his leadership because he can't be himself until much later in the series. Mm-hmm. And then once he really can be himself in his world, and there are people who trust that, then his leadership decisions also improve and his relationships improve.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really stuck out, because you mentioned a lot about character decisions, which making me think, it's like, it's not quite that they're looking for the right thing to do. It's that they care about what other people will think and feel. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's like, so Darrow has to, again, this is going back to the Titus thing, which for whatever reason stuck with me, and, kind of passes off the decision to Cassius, in terms of how to deal with this, because Cassius thought at the time that, he was murdered his brother, and then he kind of realizes it isn't. But was that the right thing to do? It's like, that's not even, you can't even really talk in those terms. It's like, okay, Darrow felt he needed to do this, and it had this effect. Other people thought this because of the way he decided things. So, and like, would people have thought differently had he made the other decision? I don't know. It's just about what people think. And like, when you talk about like establishing leadership, that's what that's all about. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think if Red Rising does anything, it does a pretty good job of at every decision point. And like, again, I'm at the first book and people can, fill in like if there's different points where that happens, of like, we're not exploring morality per se over here. We're exploring how people react to people. And like, if you do this, then you're going to alienate this person. If you do it this way, then this person, they're going to hate you forever and all that kind of thing. And like the good thing is that it kind of like the book does a good job of like bringing that stuff back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting too that both of you mentioned that you aren't a big fan of Darrow, and
I think he's a
oh, what a jerk.
I am stuck in his head. It's driving me nuts.
And he's very full of himself. And I think I think when I was reading the first book, I was like, okay, Pierce wants Darrow to be the hero. But the more and more I read, I think Pierce, I don't know if Pierce really was going for that anymore, especially, I won't go into stuff in book 4 and 5, but I think he becomes less and less the hero, like almost an anti-hero, maybe even a villain at a certain point. Not directly the way we think about villains, cut and dry, black and white, but I think it's good that you don't like him all that much. I think that's maybe intended.
I think I almost think about him. Did you see Mad Men, the show when it was on?
Yeah.
I almost think about him like Don Draper, where he's not like, and it's an interesting parallel because in the show, and sorry for spoiling Mad Men, it's like 20 years old at this point. Go ahead and watch it. Like part of the thing of Don Draper is that he's hiding as another person, like he's hiding a background, and so like Don Draper is fake. And Don Draper is not that interesting. And it's almost like Don Draper is just like our entry into this world and other people. Like, when Don walks into this person's room, now I get to hang out with this other person. And that's the cool thing. Mm-hmm. That's how I felt about Darrow, where it's like Darrow became this conveyance. So it's like, okay, I want to hang out with Cassius. Where's Severo? I can't keep me enough Severo. And like whenever he popped up and like they, and I got excited when Darrow kind of formed like that allegiance, or like Severo chose that allegiance. I think it was kind of more how that worked. And it's like, so I'm not interested in what Darrow's thinking. He feels like more like a newspaper, like he's reporting things, because he's hiding things, because the way the book is structured. But what comes out is all these other characters felt more interesting in a way, and it made me want to like, okay, give me more of these people.
I think I just struggled with being in Darrow's head. Like every single cutscene where he's like, no one knew what to do, so they all looked to the greatest source of power in the room, and lo, it was me. It's like, oh god, like the sort of cult-like aspects of his character that he either seems to engender, or maybe Pierce Brown just wrote that in. Like I can't tell how convincing I find that, especially in a world full of people who are scrabbling and trying to take other people down to get to the top. Like there are parts of it that I didn't find probable, but I also wonder, like, what would this have felt like from Mustang's point of view? Like, I've often wondered what Harry Potter looks like from Hermione's point of view as well. I can't help that. But, some people say Mustang is, like, too perfect, but I actually I liked her quite a bit. I don't know if I could have stood Severo's point of view for the first half of the series because he takes so long to grow up. Mm-hmm. But it's just
I read a lot into Severo, like I believe me as like the little the rental litter.
Yeah, but he's an interesting life and an interesting background. Like he's cool. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So who is your favorite character, Jamey? Is it Darrow, or is it like just?
No, it's not Darrow.
Okay.
I'm always entertained by Severo. Always entertained by him. But I think I liked Ragnar the best. Ragnar's
cool.
The world building stuff that emerges from how the Golds managed to suppress the Obsidians, I thought was fascinating. And I
haven't read that far, so maybe you could fill me in a little bit.
I don't want to do. That's
I'm fine. You go. We're in total spoiler territory, so I'm cool. It may think for me, actually, I like knowing a little bit of what happened, so I can kind of like get drawn into something and look forward to something. It's fine.
Ragnar is basically just he's a big Obsidian character that befriends Darrow. Darrow befriends him, and he and so I don't know. He just ends up being a really, really interesting character. He's highly intelligent, which is kind of like the book plays off that for a while. They play off the idea of Obsidians not just being these brutes, these assassins, and then you learn that that's not true, and you also learn that I think that one of the big reveals is. Like I was wondering through the first book and the first probably 2 books, how like if the Obsidians had the physical prowess to compete with Golds, and now you learn that they have the intelligence as well. How have they not risen up before? And it turns out that the Golds have positioned themselves almost like Greek gods. Like they've really fully convinced the Obsidians that they are godlike, and the Obsidians believe that this is their mythology that they're brought up in, and so. They just don't challenge that they really think, and because the Golds to them kind of are that's how they've with the technology that the Golds have. I don't know. It's just and there's more to it than that, but that's fascinating.
There's also the idea that like they are this like the next level down. So it's like if you challenge us, maybe it's said, maybe it's unsaid, but if you challenge us, well, look at all these other people that are like you have it better than them. So it's like, do you really want to? And it goes back to the way that and this is a really cool, like kind of like I studied social philosophy in college. So I was really into this. So it's like, we suck. We know we suck, but what are the alternatives?
Yeah. Well,
right.
Yeah.
and the gold really kind of put that out there of like, if we don't rule, and if we don't rule the way we rule, then even the little bit that you have will be gone. And being able to kind of instantiate that in the mythology and the propaganda, even amongst like the higher classes, as you were saying. So that was interesting. And again, like understanding that Red Rising is about hierarchy, understanding it isn't just like there's real drawn out reasons what sustains the hierarchy, which I think is my favorite part of the world building.
Yeah.
Like it really explains that.
I also like Ragnar a lot. His nobility of spirit and like his self-actualization are just really like there's basically a really good scene between him and Darrow where Darrow really encourages him to be himself and to exercise agency. And he's like, you don't want to hear it. I can't do this. It's too dangerous. And then he finally realizes that Darrow is serious, but Darrow has to tell the truth about himself in order for that to happen. And I think that I just really liked that interplay where, Ragnar couldn't ever truly trust a full gold because of the way society is set up. I thought that was good. Although actually, who I wanted to hear more about? There's actually a couple. So I want to know more about Mickey the Carver. Mickey was bad. And yet I did kind of like him. And so I wanted to get more insight into
what did you mean Mickey was bad? Like I didn't get that Mickey
like what he did to
bad.
Evie. He's basically engaged in human trafficking. Like he makes monsters out of people painfully and then like sells them into like sexual slavery. I mean, he's not a good person. But at the same time, like he is somebody that Darrow weirdly likes and who kind of survives by his charm. I would have been more interested in seeing more about Mickey. And I also was super interested in the Quicksilver Mateo relationship. So Quicksilver is a silver who is like a big power broker, has a lot of money, but not a gold. And he is married to a pink, and they are basically considered like the sexual service class. And that is what they are forced to do in the society. And so it's an intercolor marriage that is a love story. It's respectful. Darrow has actually met the husband, Mateo, earlier in book 1. He shows up later. And I kind of wanted more insight into their lives. You know what I mean? Like, It seems cool. Like, everybody's living these really cool lives around Darrow. And if they're not cool because they're, good, they're cool because they're interesting and they're full of, like, all of this human emotion. And sometimes it's like I don't know, it's like playing Pokemon Snap. Like, the thing goes too fast, and you want to sit there and look at that Pokemon, and you got to keep going.
What about you, Jamey? What are some characters that you would like to have seen more of fleshed out? Because we all do it, right? We like kind of go in our heads, like, okay, like invent little stories and stuff. So like, what are some of those characters for you?
Well, I would say Lysander. He's kind of maybe one of the youngest characters that we see a bit of in the books, but he's kind of just used as a pawn in the first 3 books. But he is a major character in books 4 and 5. I believe 4 in particular, and 5 a little bit. And so that would be my answer. But I like that in books 4 and 5, Pierce writes from different perspectives. So you actually writes from Lysander's perspective for a little bit. So you really get to see what's in his head and see the world from his perspective. And he also adds another character. I can't remember her name in book 4, but she's a young character. I can't even actually remember her color. I need to go back and read books 4 and 5. But he adds these different perspectives and how from different colors. And this is like 10 years after the event, or maybe even longer, 10 or so years after the events of book 3. So some of the characters that I wish I could have known more about, or the types of characters I would have known more about, are explored in books 4 and 5. And the blues too. The blues to me are fascinating. How they have these these circuits integrated into their heads. They're incredibly intelligent and very good at doing one specific thing. And how once they start to be able to make choices on their own, or allowed to, or feel the ability to, kind of like what you said with Ragnar, I didn't feel he was able to have that agency. I like the way you said that. Blues, I have a similar feeling. What about you, Jason? Do you have any that you'd like to learn more about?
Oh, I mean, I think not necessarily characters, but there were some like unanswered questions. So like you mentioned Mickey the Carver, and that made me think of this immediately. So like they spend the whole first part of the book like carving up Darrow and like reforming him into this like new person, and then he just slides right in, like no scarring, no like it's a perfect thing. And it's like I'm thinking, because I get the vibe of like Frankenstein's monster when I think of Mickey. Jamey's disappearing. He's got
no, it's a cat.
Gotta get the cat.
So the most important character in any scenario is the cat.
Liz approves of your care of the cat.
Walter's been sitting directly behind me, just crying at me the last 10 minutes. Sorry about that. You were saying something very. I was listening.
Fine. That was perfectly fine. I mean, just like little things. Like, okay, he's called Mickey the Carver, for crying out loud. We spend like a fourth of the book, like with, basically this torture of making this person a new person. And then he goes into the Institute, and basically the first thing to do is like throw him, naked places. And it's like, he has no scars. Like this just like works, and I don't know. Like, because I remember like one of my favorite shows was The Wire, and like they would try to go undercover, but like it would be sometimes good, sometimes bad, because like they couldn't pull it off. So I had my antennas up to that. It's like, how could he just pull this off? Especially with a weird name like Darrow, like, because they point that out. It's like, okay, make it work. It's like, well, sometimes it's not that easy. I love when, and a lot of books do this. Like, I love when people people like Ragnar, and I haven't gotten that far, but like, just kind of like, seeing ahead. I love when people just sit there and pontificate on the world. And sit there and like elaborate their philosophies and all that kind of thing. It's like getting to know a little bit more. And I think the Sons of Ares, just in terms of like what they are, I am a revolutionary group is interesting, but like kind of diving a little bit more into like what the why Ares and some of the other stuff. And it's there, but it's like so it could have been, for me, who's interested in that kind of thing, would be interesting to hear about. So no, but it's good. I could definitely recommend the book, and clearly, that's where we all are in terms of recommending the book. Is it the best book that you've ever read? Is the best book you've ever read? Why your mileage may vary, but there's a lot there. If that's what you're interested in, I think that's kind of at the end of the day.
Yeah. Also, you should keep reading if you want to know more about Ares, because you find out who that is, and there are actually kind of interesting inside faction like disagreements about how to deal with the gold problem. Are we trying to be terrorists? Are we trying?
That would
to,
be cool. Like I haven't gotten that.
Those issues come up. Like the world really widens after the first book. Actually, I think that I really did not like the first book, but I liked the second and third ones much better. And I think part of it is that by the end of the first book, Darrow's still just a kid, and he's like a typical teenage boy who thinks he's cock of the walk because he did great at the Institute. And then now, but then by the very soon in the next book, he's getting his butt kicked by people who actually know what they're doing. And I actually would have liked to see more of that. Like the one thing so this Harry Potter has this problem as well. It's like everybody's stuck in their high school class forever. Like all the people in high school are the people who continue to matter when you're an adult, and like I did not live that life. So it's like the best pilot in the whole universe is somebody that was at the Institute with Darrow, and it's like, really, and like the next potential world leader is somebody who's at the Institute with Darrow, and you're like, really?
How convenient.
And YA has to be like that, right? Because it's about young people making their way in the world and mattering. And so in that sense, I really approve of it. As an adult reading it, I'm like,
Yeah, every little like teenager group wants to think. Because I remember like as a teenager graduating and going, okay, what adventures are we going to go on now? And like having fiction that actually
you get to have a job.
Yeah. Right? So is there anything else, Jamey, in terms of like what interested you about the book? What things that you kind of want to think about and share? We talked about characters and different other things, but is anything that we're missing, or are we pretty covered everything that's interesting to you?
Well, one other thing that you two did touch upon that I wanted to accentuate briefly is that I love how the books, Liz, you just said this, but it happens even through books 4 and 5, how the world keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I love stories, books, novels that do that well when like all the world building doesn't happen in the first chapter, how it just emerges throughout, and it really gets bigger and bigger. There's stuff with Jupiter, there's a whole other like world around the moons of Jupiter. That's a pretty big deal, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And I like fiction just in general that does that. So if either of you have any other dystopian fiction or any sort of fiction that does that world building over multiple books, where you just keeps getting bigger and bigger, you see that bigger perspective. I'm open to recommendations too. I'd love to hear what you think.
Poppy War. Which Jason, I
I finished the second book. I got to pick up the third book because we got to cover it on the show. Yeah. We did a book chat on the first book, but when we have to go on to the second one, have you read the Poppy War?
Yeah. I read I think the third book came out a few months ago.
Yeah.
It's
it's
a great series, but it deals with addiction. Like you don't see addiction too often in YA literature.
Yeah. I want to make one more nerd point about Red Rising. So I'm a Latin teacher. Obviously, I was very fascinated by all the Roman names and the use of Latin. So It didn't always
How did they
match.
mess it up, Liz? How did they mess it up?
No, it's not that. It's that I think it's really interesting that we continue to perceive Greco-Roman mythology and those names and Latin as the language and culture of elite people,
right,
even in a world that's just been invented by someone. And I think that is a really interesting indicator of the hold that Roman culture continues to have on the West. And I think also, it's really interesting the way that we continue to understand Latin and that aspect of ancient history and culture. We want to associate it with like the top brass, the top gold, and like there's so much to process with that, just like throughout our culture. And for me as a Latin teacher,
an interesting parallel to that with the Poppy War, how Confucianism is their version of that. And like, what are the highest things that you can be in a Confucian world, which is graduated from a certain school.
Yeah,
this is your thing. So like, how, like every culture has that, and it's fascinating to how like it plays out differently. But every culture seems to need a signifier of hierarchy. At the end of the day, it's like, okay, and that's part of the gold's point. Is like, there's a part of us that yearns for hierarchy and yearns for the seat of hierarchy, and the golds are like, you want that? Here you go.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So
in that same category, I would put the Jade series, Jade City and Jade War. It's very similar to what you just said, Jason, in many different ways, but it's a totally different fantasy style universe. Jade City is the first book. Jade War, I think the third book is coming out soon. Either of you heard of that series?
Genre of that?
It's I guess somewhat urban fantasy. Like it takes place in a fairly modern world, but there's magic inside jade, like what we see as jade stone. There's magic that comes out of it, and you can either be trained in how to use that magic, or you can just try to use it and often get addicted to it or have it overwhelm you. And it has interesting parallel to Red Rising. The characters have to make really tough decisions. It has a mafia undertone to it too. Different. Yeah.
Yeah, I just looked it up. I've definitely seen this on Book Talk.
Yeah.
So I know it gets, the Green Bone Saga, Jade City by Fonda Lee. Yeah, I like crime syndicate stories as well. So that looks actually really interesting. That's going on the potential list.
Yeah.
So that was our discussion of Red Rising. That is our book chat. As you can see, we are huge book lovers. We want to explore the conflicts between books and games because both things are made richer by the interaction with one another. I really do believe that. So, Jamey, thank you so much for taking a little bit of time on a Saturday. Despite your cat's wishes, which I think your cat is happy now.
He is happy now.
Got his food, got his chair. I think he's much better than he was about 20 minutes ago. Well, thank you very much for hopping on the show.
Yeah, it's great to talk to both of you. Liz, I'm excited about your YouTube channel. I've subscribed while we were chatting here. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah, you go.
It's good to meet you too. This is the first time we met, so it was nice.
Yeah, it's been great.
And Liz Davidson, you are not going to be. It has been too long. We should probably schedule in more. Although we do have a top list at some point coming pretty soon, right?
Yeah, we got to do our top 50 games each for the Dice Tower. Cool. We signed in blood during the Kickstarter.
Got to make that happen.
Yes, I'm just gonna make a randomized list of 50 games. We'll just see it. No joking.
No thought at all. All right. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
All right. Take care.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world. So until next time, bye everybody.